purpose. And I just wanted to really quickly say on that, I mean, it may be obvious from our introductions, but even though this is high level visioning at this point in the planning study, our goal, the purpose of this is to have an implementable document. A lot of these, the area-wide plans have been used around Vermont to implement projects and get funding. So Bennington, St. Albans, whereas a lot of studies are on feasibility, this is really a plan that has a pathway to implement and fund and address land use issues and contamination. So that's really important to keep in mind. And then also in this room, this is a focus group for the property owners, and just about every part of the that map is covered by with an ownership interest by people that are here in the focus group. So like the northern third of the island there is rail property, and Michelle is here as the policy planning for the rail. BFADC has a few representatives here that own a lot of the middle of Island Street, both sides of the Napa building. SVG that has the 30 Island Street, and Wyman Flint and a TLR interest. And let's see, in Great River Hydro, that's the canal, the whole chunk in the middle of the island. The town that has the waypoint and train station interest. And Bellows Falls Historical Society that has the park and the Adams Grist Mill. So really all of the assets that we're looking at, just about nearly are present here. And so just wanted to cover that. Even though it's a planning study, at the end of 3 months, we are hoping to go to the next step of implementing 5 projects in the study area. That's it. Thank you.
Okay. Kelly?
Yes. Go ahead, Kelly.
Quote unquote is also an asset on the island.
Oh yes, yeah. So and Kelly Tully, who was on the eastern side there. I was looking around the room trying to think of what I was missing, and you're not on our screen there. It only shows 3 people. Sorry about that. But a huge chunk on the eastern portion of that island, from the rail property over to Bridge Street and almost to Island Street, is Coda and Coda.
Yeah.
Gary, can I ask, did anybody reach out to any of the folks from the Abenaki to see if they had an interest in this as well?
We did, and did not get a response. Yeah.
All right. So next slide, Taylor. Yeah. All right. For some reason, there's one missing, but yeah. So this one is about sort of visual and placemaking assets. So similar to the other one, but this one's a little bit more about things that, you know, visually add interest to the place. And this includes, number one, sort of the rail and rail activity, and, you know, the idea that people come here to see rail cars and railroad. There's the actual train station and the bus station. There's the creamery building. There's the Vilas Bridge, which has a certain beauty in its own right. There's the Waypoint Visitor Center, which is important. There's the kind of corner with the, you know, studio space, the Times building, and the upper mill, and then the lower mill area. And then there's the post office, and then sort of the number 12 down there is the historic mill area down below. So these are kind of important visual assets that we really noted in a site walk that we took a few weeks back, and things that we want to kind of keep in mind and you know, as we move forward with our planning study. Any Any thoughts on that as far as clarifications go? All right, next slide. So you see, each one of these is kind of a slice at a different way of thinking and talking about things. And, the part of what we just want to get input on as we go forward. So this one is more about sort of restrictions out there. And it's a little hard to see, but there's a couple areas that are outlined in red. And then the thing that you see probably more strongly is kind of outlined in orange. So these are things that, we feel like are pretty set in stone. The red is in red because it's more of a sort of a stopping point, something that really won't probably change. Whereas the orange are things that, won't change or are unlikely to change, but maybe we could use the space in a different way, if you will. So this includes the dam itself, the rail connections, the two, you see kind of number 2 there, near a series of those. The 3 is the rail yard, and we have that in orange. And the reason it's in orange, obviously that, it's there, it has significant constraints to it, but maybe some of the property could be used in different ways. For example, solar, possibly could sit on top of the land without drastically changing it or doing a lot of mitigation. So we just kind of put that there. 4 is the power canal. Obviously, it's a critical asset for Great River Hydro, and it probably won't change, but could we do some things at the edges? Could we cross it? Things like that. So that's kind of why that's in orange. 5, which is another kind of red, is sort of the switch yard, transformer yard. And then 6 is kind of the Great River Hydro facility and property itself. So, this one is kind of important in a lot of ways because it's saying there's a few things that are, almost untouchable. There's a few things that we want to be careful about, but it also in some ways shows that there's a lot of area here that, could be changed, could be affected by kind of this planning study. So any thoughts or clarifications on that one?
Mark, I just wanted to mention this map regarding planning restrictions is mostly infrastructure, and it doesn't speak to environmental restrictions, which is something we highlighted in our work.
Yeah.
So that's sort of another factor, another element of restriction that we'll have to deal with in certain areas.
Yes. Yep. And hopefully we'll have you talk about that a little bit in a few minutes.
Okay.
Mark, this is Michelle from the Agency of Transportation. While we lease the rail yard to the Vermont Rail Systems for their active use of the rail area, I think that any consideration of alternative uses on the rail yard properties would have to be very carefully considered. Sometimes it appears as though rail property is obviously not being used for a number of years, but then we have needs that pop up and then activity occurs. And so we historically try to not encumber rail properties with other uses so that we have them available to us when we need them for transitionary activities. So I just want to highlight that as a consideration.
Yeah. No, I think that's a great point. And, in the end, with further discussions, it might be that this area becomes red and we take it off the table. We just, in general, we'd like to not go there just kind of right off the bat. We like to be thoughtful about that. Yep.
Sure.
So thank you for that comment. All right, Taylor, next one. So this one gets a little bit to the idea of, sort of private ownership and sort of building infrastructure. You can, we haven't done this by property lines per se. It's more about the buildings that are out there. And, I think as we talked to the building owners, Coda and Coda, Great River Hydro, things like that, we can kind of see some of those facilities here. So this is something that these are kind of in orange because sort of like with the last map, they put constraints on, but many of these could be you know, adjusted, morphed, added to as we think about the actual planning and design that could go on here. These are definitely things we want to think about, but we might go ahead and suggest some changes or growth. Yeah, let's go to the next one then. So this one is kind of trying to get at, so we're here, we're collecting, we're going to talk about the maps. We're going to talk about some hopes for the future, things like that. This one is a little bit about how we're going to think about that. So based on those restrictions and things going on there, we start to see this as, you know, sort of a series of 7 or 8 distinct kind of, oh, yeah. Good point. There we go. You know, sort of distinct areas of study. And some of these are, you know, they are existing things that most likely will stay. You know, the rail yards maybe, coda and coda. So we're not suggesting because these are a bubble that they're open, you know, that necessarily we're going to design them or plan them differently than they are now. But just from a kind of perception and organizational point of view, this is how we're starting to kind of think about places where we might make changes and where they kind of fit together or don't fit together.
So Kelly did have her hand raised. Is there?
Just can't see anything below F, D, and E. I don't know if somebody, maybe it's me, but I can't see the whole picture.
What about other folks online? Is it cut off?
No, it
it's
looks
fine.
looks good. Sorry, Kelly.
That's okay.
Are you looking at it on your phone, maybe?
Nope.
It's on a computer, yeah. Okay.
All right, so Taylor, could you switch to the next presentation? And this is the one that Bettina. Yeah, I think so. Yeah. So Bettina, you want to talk to some of the findings that you guys have come to so far?
Sure. Well, as you can see, we were also part of the site walk team, looking from a different angle, though. We were looking at from the angle of environmental concerns and, you know, properties and sites that might be considered brownfields. And again, some of our overview kind of has touched on some of the points that Mark mentioned, but, you know, over the almost, I think it's about a 47-acre island, we've got about 44 parcels. And from a brownfields development point of view, parcel size is always something that comes into play because depending on how you want to reuse it, sometimes parcel size, you know, there's a minimum amount of space that's required, but mostly what we saw is many of them are on the small side. Most of them are less than an acre. You know, some are in that middle range, 1 to 2, but some are also quite larger, which are mostly the railroad parcel and that hydro parcel. I can't, let me see, hold on, I gotta stretch my screen here. But I also, again, noticed that the ownership varies a lot. We've got a lot of privately owned land, and part of, you know, getting your brownfields program sort of up and running is to be able to get private landowners, you know, interested in the brownfields process and to also to participate in it. So, you know, there's some educational efforts there that will be needed in case they're not familiar about the whole assessment, cleanup, remedial planning process that is part of brownfields. So there'll be that, I think, effort that, you know, may be needed depending upon the level of, you know, knowledge already existing regarding brownfields. I did notice that, you know, there was about 6 parcels that the town already owns. So that's good. And a lot has already been done on those parcels. So they're sort of the leaders now in this brownfield development because they have ownership and they're already starting that process of getting them redeveloped. Did notice we had, you know, 2 state-owned parcels, one of which was the railroad. We had a post office building, which I think is going to stay a post office. But between, just the rail yard and the hydro dam, they take up almost 50% of the whole area. Regarding restrictions of another type, the land use restrictions, and these are basically in the form of institutional controls. And right now, there's 3 parcels. Wayside has a environmental restriction due to contamination in groundwater. There's a small parcel on Bridge Street that was a former substation. It's a little triangular parcel. That has a land use restriction due to some former PCB contamination. So it's undeveloped. And then Wyman Flint, Penta South area has a very extensive land use restriction that extends, is partly in the study area, but it also extends further south along the river due to dioxin. So there's a lot of limitations there. And then I think the Robertson paper mill, from what I read, also in their corrective action plan proposed a land use restriction in some form, which I don't have, it appears it has not been put in place yet. So there's some evaluation there to see if that's still needed, and if so, what the restrictions of that's going to be for Robertson. So that's, I think, a priority in order to take that property to the next step. But I also did see there's a lot of parcels that are within the historical district designation, which is something, when you're doing brownfields work, you have to consider. You have to do historical reviews, both for architectural or archaeological reasons. Anytime you're going after brownfields assessment funding or cleanup funding. Also just noticed in general from a geological perspective, the land and terrain there is very rocky. We've got a lot of shallow bedrock. That's always challenging from, assessment and potential contamination if it tends to go deep. Assessments can get complex sometimes when bedrock is shallow and not confined to the overburden. And lastly, just overall, we already, are aware that there's about 12, state sites that are in the system on the island. And about 5 of those are already within working in a brownfields program of some kind. So that's good. I think we just have to keep looking at those and trying to push them forward to the next phase.
You all set?
Yep, that was my overview.
Thank you.
Mhm.
We getting feedback? All right, I think we're better now.
Oh, okay. That was some strange sounds.
Yeah, that was some strange. Thank you for that, Bettina. That was good.
Okay.
Do
Right.
people have any questions or clarifications about what Bettina covered? All right, good. Well, the other part that we really wanted to get to here is getting, feedback on what people would like to see. So Taylor, if you go to the next PDF. No, the other way. Well, while you're on that, that's the map that Bettina and Nobis has produced. I don't think we'll get into it, but it is available here, and we'll talk to it. Obviously, it's a pretty in-depth look at environmental issues and hazards on the site. So it should be the next one. No, that one. Yep. All right, so hopefully you guys saw this in the, kind of lead up. It was kind of the flyer to gather interest here. And we'd really like to spend a little bit of time talking about what people would like to see in the study area in the future. So We typically do this by voting with sort of dots on a piece of paper, but I'm pretty sure there's as many people in Zoom who won't be able to do that easily. So maybe a better idea is just sort of have a discussion about it. There's a series of ideas around the edge of the sheet there, things that maybe people have thought of before, maybe some new ideas. We'd kind of like to have a bit of a discussion about which of these people like. You know, we'll do a series of kind of alternatives. So you don't necessarily have to pick your favorite. You can pick things that you would like us to look at and see if they're a potential. And we'll come back with a plan that might, you know, show one of those uses or a mix of uses together. But we'd like to narrow the field into sort of what things people would like us to look at. And also, if you have your own ideas, we'd like to add those to this list. So that's kind of what this next public input sort of voting on the agenda is about. So would anybody like to start? Weigh in on this? Robin?
Sure. So the Abenaki cultural experience is something that's there, and I don't think that that will be anything that, I mean, we should keep that on the list only because it's kind of important. Well, not kind of, it is important to the experience of the island. And obviously the rail isn't going to be moving with any luck. So I think those two are just kind of easy things to leave on. And probably
good.
power related things as well, only because of the dam. And there are people who obviously are attracted by rail and also dams.
Yeah. Are there other uses there that interest you that you would like to see?
Weirdly, I know this sounds odd, but the views, believe it or not, there is an excellent view from 21 Island Street, which is the old Robertson paper mill. There's a pretty decent view from there. And before, when the mill was there, people used to go up the side to overlook the rail cars and the river. I mean, it's not really a money maker, but it is there. And it could probably go with the cultural experience part with the Abenaki. Maybe those two things together are more of a one than two separate things.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously I like anything that's specialty industrial or light industrial, just because it creates jobs, and BFADC is very interested in that happening.
Okay, good. Other thoughts?
Mark, I was going to add, this is part of my environmental sort of review. I was really interested in the historical aspects on the island, you know, relating to rail use and also to the milk and creamery industries that were really more extensive in the past. That could probably tie into a cultural / historical experience, and maybe taking, you know, some property or reusing it, you know, as a museum or as a visitor center / museum that would touch on those historical attributes of the community.
Yeah, good.
I have one other idea on the wheel of ideas. Well, anytime, you know, we're looking at brownfields too, solar is always a really good companion to a brownfield site, especially for some that might have some limited uses or restrictions. So I'd like to know how much solar power and is used town-wide right now on a town basis, and if there's a need for it, because potentially, you know, maybe there's parcels that could expand that solar usability within the town.
This is Brandon. I think tying off of what you were just mentioning is battery storage as well. You know, battery storage may be a good alternative use for brownfield sites as well, for the same reasons, and you can get a greater deal of energy density on a smaller footprint, which, you know, we're dealing with pretty small footprints out here.
Yep.
And, you know, obviously, as a representative of Great River Hydro, you know, we're clearly interested in renewable energy generally. And I really think there's an interesting tie between the history, you know, our Bellows Falls station being a historical feature itself, and very important to the very beginning of commercial electrification in New England, but also going to be very important as our grid transitions to a more carbon-free energy resource going forward. So, you know, building a tie between the history of renewable energy and the future of renewable energy, I think, is a really compelling story, especially since, as we've talked about, how our facilities are really cutting right through the heart of the island in the study area and in general. So, and I should also mention one of the things that was not pointed out as one of the resources at the beginning of this conversation is, yes, our fish ladder, and which also serves as the Grafton Nature Museum's center of programming here on the island as well. So I think that's an interesting asset that could also be leveraged in these discussions.
Oops.
Go ahead, Robin.
If I could just add that, just speaking from BFADC, and when we went to talk about changes to zoning for the island in general, we were more interested in mixed use village than having actual homes out there, individual. And a lot of that also, getting back to, is the size of the island in general and the property owners. So a sort of a mixed use village use is the way it's spelled out in our or in the BF/Rockingham zoning for that area. So if it was a auxiliary or a conditional use, would be housing, and how it would relate to light industrial or I mean, I don't have it right in front of me, and I'm sorry about that.
That's okay.
Thanks.
Do others have feelings about this idea of sort of mixed use development?
Yeah, I would just concur that housing has been identified as important to economic development in the workforce here. And the sites that the view that was being referred to earlier, attractive for high up housing, and certainly the job creation, mixed use on the lower levels. I think the zoning refers to it as housing as an accessory uses. So if there's some job creation aspect to the same property, that mixed use is certainly a good fit. And also typically with development of train station activity, and you know, that catchphrase of transit-orient development is the foot traffic providing the commercial on the lower floors and some housing on upper levels. And just I did love hearing all of the ideas put together around history between all the different aspects of the rail history, the canal, energy. Those all kind of fit together, and we haven't said. I mean, we heard about the effects of them. Bettina was talking about dioxins and different contamination a lot, but the paper industry that was there is also a good fit for. There's like probably 4 things fit really nicely together in telling that history, and we do have a lot of artifacts and stakeholders here related to all of them that would be great to have as a central destination. Yeah.
I would say the 5th is the Abenaki presence.
Yes.
Yeah, and also speaking of the mixed use development, I think that's sort of the way that our downtown has traditionally grown is, very mixed use. Historically, that area of the island in the late 19th and 20th century was actually heavy industrial, but I think going forward, it seems more natural to expand more into the mixed use, and that's actually more what that area was like in about the 3rd quarter of the 19th century. Where it was in that transition phase where you had light industrial, residential, hotel, transportation, all kind of mixed together. And I think that diversity is more the way that we probably want to go with, building our modern communities. For resiliency.
Thank you.
I have something also to say because it's here in the picture about the Hula Cat building or Meatland. I have plans to open a record store here in town real soon. And that's one of the places I'm considering is getting him to open back up. And so I'm not sure what else could be done to make it less of an eyesore, but it's either like a soft opening there and get his store going again or somewhere else in town. There's a couple locations, but yeah, so that's exciting. And it's just Hula Cat building. So if there's anything I can help with on that as well. So
Thank you. All right, so obviously there was some kind of support for industrial related uses. There was a lot of discussion of historic and, a variety of elements of history. We heard about mixed use. Can you guys see the images that are up there, or should we make them a little bigger? They're really just meant as prompts for ideas. Yeah, go ahead, Kelly.
Yeah, I wanted to, you started to speak about the industrial aspect, whether we're, a large employer on the island. Certainly our company has been around for 80 years. My grandfather started it in 1941, and we have, I don't know whether you call it industrial or special industrial. So we do also, and I do have, on a side note, have some artifacts from when our building was a creamery. So
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah.
So yes, I do, we do appreciate the fact that we have been there for quite a while and will continue to be there.
That's great. Are there other things on the list there that people don't like, or sort of not in favor of?
Probably just the straight up homes, but I think that's covered in what Gary was talking about with the mixed use.
Yep. All right. I don't know. We we do want to give people a chance to talk about the maps a little bit. Was there anything in those earlier maps that people want to discuss more, clarify, or add to them?
I guess the one thing we didn't really touch on is Amtrak, right? We talked about rail, but we didn't talk more about passenger, because one of the connections that Gary and I have been talking about is opportunities to connect recreation, like skiers. We talked about, the possibility. There are tracks that run, directly to chemo, and with a little bit of investment, I think that could be another opportunity. We do, anticipate the Montrealer and some of the other, Amtrak returning. And so those are all opportunities for us to attract people here. So, the other portions of rail freight and those things are important. We don't want to crowd them out, but there's another piece of rail that I think we're missing sometimes that I think would help us as well, especially our downtown.
Is there discussion about some of the rail from the south, the Valley Flyer coming up?
Yes, that's so. I think in the 5-year rail plan for the Montrealer is sooner in there, but certainly the Valley Flyer, the demonstration project looks good through Greenfield, and the next exploration I think indicated is going further to either Brattleboro or White River Junction. So long term, all of those pieces working out would be 3 round trips per day, 6 trips per day of passenger rail intercity through Bellows Falls. And then the ski train would be another local connection, be additional passengers. So yeah, a lot of potential there.
So I think the key here, we've tried to give some indication of our thinking and our process and tried to give some prompts. But really the key here is that people discuss what is important to them and they would like us to consider as we're working on this planning study. So we can think more broadly. If there's issues that people would like to bring up or discuss, now would be a great time to hear about them and think about them and add to our knowledge base, if you will. Robin?
Well, BFADC is adamant about using their property to create jobs. And the idea is that they be good paying jobs that cater to the sort of the work and workers and employees that are already in the Bellows Falls area, so that we work within those parameters, but that they, we have employment. And with that, obviously, we have the one property. I believe, and Gary can correct me, I thought the cap was approved, Gary, no?
There's been a little back and forth with Alan Liptak and drawing a blank, but Sarah at yes. So it's not quite. It's very close. It's very close, and I think the restrictions they've been talking about that Bettina was saying are not there yet. Would just be that the cap has to be managed when pouring footings, when doing any excavation.
Right.
Yeah. So there'd need to be a soil management plan and then observation of it during the work and closing it back up. So a little bit of cost there.
The other thing is the train station and how that could be really attractive. And also, and Coda with some of the expansion that they had wanted to do. So we sort of have this kind of good base with Coda. And with the train having things around there that would attract people from away to come and sort of from a tourism aspect is something that we haven't really talked about. I think that's maybe where the views, the petroglyph, and possibly even when we did that that last plan where we had and I forget the name of it all the time, Gary. So I'm so sorry. The one we just did a year ago, the Rural Ventures one. One of the things that they talked about was that people thought that they needed a boutique hotel in Bellows Falls. There was also sort of a community center for children and young adults, and programming for that. That was also mentioned. So these are all things that are like in the back of our heads. We're constantly trying to work all of those facets into the town plan and also this, so that we hit those things from the public that they've already kind of made known that these are things. And redevelopment was also another one, the redevelopment of sort of abandoned or underutilized buildings. And that's something BFADC is always thinking about. But those are maybe my 2 cents there. I'm going to mute myself now.
Yeah, so that's a really good point. So just a year ago, 2 years ago, and finishing a year ago, the community visit with the Vermont Council on Rural Development had 3 areas identified as critical, and one of them was the building and property redevelopment in this study area. So we know that the work here has community support, and then those other 2 Robin mentioned, the youth community center piece. And the other one was climate and resiliency, and some of the things that Brandon was referring to fit well with that. So I think where this is going so far, where property owners here have indicated is consistent with what the larger community identified in that other process.
Anybody else have other thoughts that they want to share? Concerns? So I have some drawings here that I would love to share with the people here. I mean, you've all seen them, but I'm not sure how to do this online and, sort of like the ones over on the side here, maybe get around them and talk a bit about them.
Yeah, so can this camera show presentation boards on the screen? Yeah.
I mean, these we've all seen. It's more kind of like looking at, yeah, and actually like discussing ideas a bit. We could do that. Sure. Well, I mean, it would be good for us to like point at it.
Oh, 3D model.
So in a lot of design things, we do these things called charrettes where people have the ability to kind of talk through ideas, sketch things out. You know, sometimes the people that are more familiar with design do the sketching. But what we have here is a bit of a model of the site. It's not overly to scale as far as like building heights go, but it gives you the, you know, sort of the impression of where buildings are. And it, you know, would allow us to think about new ideas. We have some additional blocks we could start to fill in. We could take a few blocks off the table, although, you know, that gets a little tricky because it might be something somebody actually owns right now. So we want to be a little careful about that. But we can also kind of play around with just some drawing material. But it's also just a good way to talk things through, point and, you know, have a discussion. So if anybody wants to start that off, please.
Question.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if the community has ever looked at utilizing the canal more as an asset, an attraction, whether it be for events or just using it more as a space along the banks for gathering, for recreational, you know, just walking or, you know, whatever. But I know that a lot of communities have done that. And it could be just another piece of the puzzle.
So are you thinking of access to the canal itself or just to the area around the canal for the aesthetic enjoyment?
I was
of it?
thinking more for the area around the canal. I'm thinking of a small town that I'm familiar with in northeastern Connecticut where they developed a parkway along the canal. So there's a walkway. There's also, they eventually got a grant to build a small band shell. So they have little activities there. I'm not sure even how much room there is for that kind of thing. But, you know, maybe that's something that we could look at more. If you're
I
interested.
was gonna add on that note too. If you look at like Portsmouth, New Hampshire, they have Prescott Park, and there's they do have the whole summer arts festival there. It's kind of the same thing. It's right there on the water, but they also have an outdoor performance venue. So if there's a theater group in town or opportunities for theater people to do theater now outside, I'm sure, you know, that would be something I think people would crave. I know it's something I go to kind of over where I live, you know, just to see outdoor entertainment. But there is a good, nice chunk of town-owned land on along the river there that connects right to Waypoint that I believe it's parking lot. And maybe that's the space you're thinking about, but that's the space I'm looking at my map. But yeah, I would support that idea too. I'm not as local as most of you, but I could envision something like that.
The only drawback to that would be when the freight trains come through, because they don't schedule, they just come. And it's right there. But
could be in the middle of a show.
there's a possibility, but it could add to the charm of it, maybe. I don't know.
It's true. Yeah.
So are you worried about the physical interference of the two systems, or just like the noise?
It's at grade, the
Yeah.
train when it goes through there, and there's I think there's barriers now. There didn't used to be. There's just lights.
Yeah.
And it's right at, I mean, it's pretty
How loud is it?
it's pretty loud. And also when, as Kelly's nodding sagely, but it's also it takes you aback because you can get rather close. So from a safety standpoint, maybe it's, I mean, I'm sure it meets every regulation that they have because they're very good that way, but you can get very close to it.
I would just say that right now, Friday afternoons, well, starting soon, but last summer was a good example with the farmers market there. Amtrak always comes through during the farmers market, and the kids would run up to, around where the crossing things came down to watch the train, and it was an exciting part of it. There was generally music at the market, and and the thing they worked fine together with the you definitely did have to wait for the train to pass to have for the next song sort of thing. But also, so this summer around July 4th is 5 days that a theater company through Next Stage is going to be having plays at the Waypoint Center, which is right at the grade crossing and the canal spot, the part where the land is that Bettina was referring to. So it has that has been going on, and it has worked well. There's definitely, it's just it's a different, there's an accommodation there, but yeah, great idea.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm a bit of a rail fan anyways, but I think the train traffic is quite a positive part of the experience. I mean, honestly, it's part of the reason why I'm in Bellows Falls, because I love the trains.
And we would invite Operation Lifesaver, and they do a lot of great programming around safety around the tracks. And maybe as we're getting more plays and activity there, we would involve them and have a session there, informational session.
Go ahead, Tony.
Hi, sorry to get into this so late. My previous meeting went over incredibly. Bettina's remarks about a walkway along the canal bring back a memory of talking with landowners on the west side of the canal, basically the Exner block, our 5 Canal Street property where First Light is, and the hardware store and the hotel. We envisioned, I'll say, a walking path that would go from the very north end of that area down to what is hopefully going to become a park at the south end, the old Green Mountain Power property, and ideally somewhere midway, a walking bridge across, so one could get to the Bridge Street parking lot, or from the Bridge Street parking lot back into that area. But it would facilitate the kind of canal walk I think she was describing. So I'll put that out there as something that I think is a very worthwhile idea. There's property owner support for it, and it wouldn't be too expensive. Very easy to do, really, because the only issue is crossing the railroad tracks, of course, and that's something that has to be considered. But there it is.
Thanks.
I think another small, very small way that's already been started is with the pocket park on Canal Street. Simply the way that it was set up, that's oriented towards the canal, and there's just a bench that faces the canal, and I certainly like to sit there. It's a very pleasant spot. I mean, the bench could have simply been faced the other way, so it's facing towards the street, but the simple fact that it faces towards the water makes a little bit of an experience out of that little tiny space. And I simply posted a photograph I took there one evening, looking out over the water, with a little description of the experience of the moment, and it got a lot of positive feedback on Facebook. So it's one.
You're talking down.
it would be towards the other end, by the canal bridge on Canal Street.
Oh. Point to it, might be easier.
Yeah.
Right there. Gotcha. Okay. Well, maybe another way to ask is if people had one project or one thing that they would want to see changed or improved in the study area, what would their first vote be?
Well, I can jump into that. That's bridges.
Bridges. Kelly's bridges.
I think that's a universal, I think, at this point. Those are our critical connections. You know, it helps our current businesses, it develops us for future businesses, and it really, for us, is a critical component to our entire downtown, how traffic flows, how customers come and go, how people access us. So bridges is really critical for us.
So can we talk a little bit more about the bridges? Because there's 3. There might be a 4th. There's one that doesn't work at all right now. There's one that sort of works. There's one that's in decline. What are people trying to connect to? What's the primary things that these bridges need to accomplish?
Kelly, I think maybe you would like to speak to that.
If I can figure out unmuting, I'm sure that Great River Hydro also has thoughts on that as well to access their facility, and Green Mountain Power as well, and New England Power. But certainly we have, for just from our portion of that, which is not the whole island, is you know, we have all of our trucks, and we have our maintenance facility. So our medium duty, light duty, and heavy duty trucks access the island. We also have, we provide service for other transportation companies in the area that utilize our maintenance facility, as well as our fueling facility, because it is also on the island there. So we do have all that. We do have the vendors that come to us that bring product, places like FW Web, Come Daily. We do have common carriers that go there. So we do have a great deal. All of our trucks have to go there for service, and using any of our diesel trucks use the DEF, which is distributed out of there as well. So we do have quite a bit of traffic that goes through there. We used to use certainly the Vilas Bridge and before it closed, to keep our trucks out of downtown. That's us, and I do know that, you know, certainly if there's the other companies that are there, Napa, Sunel, they do get products in there as well. I mean, only because we also do a great deal of business with them. But I'm sure, like I said, Great River Hydro has to access, and if anything were to go down. Thank you.
Thoughts about bridges? I guess one thing I'm curious about is the Bridge Street Bridge, which seems to function pretty well. You know, can handle fairly large vehicles, but it tends to send traffic into, you know, sort of the downtown. So what do people feel about that?
Would say it sort of depends on what kind of traffic you're looking to get into downtown. So if you're looking for people to come into downtown and hopefully park and get out of their vehicle and maybe spend some money, then that's the kind of traffic you want. But a lot of heavy industrial truck traffic trundling through downtown sort of detracts from that experience for those folks. So And that's where, you know, the Vilas Bridge and the status of the Vilas Bridge, I think, comes up. To Kelly's point, is a very good one, I think, in terms of keeping that type of traffic out of the downtown area and bypassing it to a degree. So I think, you know, I'm sitting here counting how many bridges enter the island, and I see 3 vehicle bridges and 1, 2, 3, 4 rail bridges. Connectivity is absolutely essential, right? And probably a new bridge that's being proposed. So, but the status of those bridges and the viability of those bridges is a critical point to the future of the island, I think.
Certainly, it's what the select board is looking at right now with the considering choices for the new canal bridge. The ideas we have on the table be to do a replacement bridge on the same, basically the same alignment as the present concrete arch. An alternative is to construct a new bridge off alignment just to the north, further up the canal, parallel the railroad bridge, which would get rid of that sharp angle onto Canal Street, and potentially, as part of that, construct a pedestrian bridge across the canal, and probably in a similar location to the current highway bridge.
Any other thoughts about bridges?
I think this is Kelly again. I mean, one of the biggest discussions that certainly we've had over the years is to try to keep the truck traffic out of downtown, and to also, as we're trying to be forward thinking of developing and creating jobs and access points, is to make sure that when we plan whatever plan we decide on as a town, is to make sure that we're planning to be able to have other people access points such as rail. And that's just really essential, is to make sure that we're thinking and trying to keep the truck traffic out of the downtown area.
Yeah, we use bridges to carry utilities. So we do carry sewer and water and other things across. And so it's vital for us to maintain some of these connections. So it's part of the discussion on the current bridge that we're talking about, the canals as well as the Vilas. Those are both, impacts for us going forward.
Yeah, as folks are saying, the thing about having an island and looking at historically in its heyday, active rail, active canal use, active paper mills. I think there were around between 1898 and 1902, like 4,000 workers on the island. Having 3 access points, the opportunity for Depot Street to be truck friendly gives that opportunity for truck traffic to avoid the downtown, and any trucks heading north would come out just north of downtown where the Irving station is. And having a cul-de-sac on an area that you're trying to have transit development, round trip passenger trains, tourist destination, existing jobs, and adding more job creation, you really need to have traffic flow that allows that prevents the situation where traffic is backing up along any junction points. So if you even today, where you have Bridge Street can sometimes back up coming onto Main Street, and if you're increasing traffic and you have traffic piling up at that Depot Street corner, just discourages the type of activity that we're looking to promote here. Anytime it's that you're inhibiting convenience, impacting people's time, it just tends to discourage activity as opposed to encourage it.
Just a comment on the bridges, if I can just jump in here quickly. We've been talking about these bridges for a long time. And I think we're coming to the very critical point where it's clearly starting to inhibit development on the island, present activities on the island. And in terms of the Vilas Bridge, commerce in the downtown. Right now we have the two routes from New Hampshire, north and south, take people right around and away from Bellows Falls. So you lose a lot of the potential commerce that could occur. If in terms of bridges, we need them all. We need them now. You know, it's an old chant from the demonstrations of the 70s, but we're in bad shape in bridges, and we're reaching a critical point where if we don't fix them, more will be closed, and so we need to get it underway. So really, bridges are number one or number zero. We have to get it going. So if there's anything that we can do in this group is to encourage that the bridges actually get underway as soon as possible, because we know there's planning time and so on and so forth. And anyway, my 2 cents.
I think, one thing that this study can do is help maybe show how infill or additional development could occur, and then add to sort of the demand, well, if you want that, and we need the bridges, and, this is additional benefit. Obviously, there would be benefits right now from doing a lot of this, but maybe we can even say, there's more out there that if the bridges function better and, we're in place, you could get this and that. So that's something that this study could help with maybe. Is there a second item? So bridges are 0 or number 1. Is there a number 2?
Did I say bridges?
I think you mentioned bridges.
I think it's challenging looking at between renovating the dilapidated mill buildings and infill redevelopment, between that and other connectivity issues. So folks were talking about tourism, historical aspect, canal walks. And when you walk,
Jobs.
when you try and do the canal walk and you follow down through, once you get to Bridge Street, the only access to that tourist destination where the grist mill is, the riverfront walk, potential museum sites, is a steep hill with a sharp blind curve in front of a train tunnel, and that's the only access to that whole area. So another priority with that whole connectivity piece that would help with the canal walks to the riverfront, with the tourist destination, with the historic pathway walks, would be addressing that connectivity that goes, that snakes down through here. And there's all this area in here where alternative access could come in behind the post office Aubuchon block area. So I think figuring out some of that is a is a critical piece. I don't know if it's number 2 between, mill building redevelopment and infill, but I think it is pretty critical to those historic and riverfront canal walk pieces that we were talking about.
That makes good sense, especially if the island, gets this vibe of, looking at history. There's all those elements down there. And if we could just make that connection, that makes good sense.
I think the order is about right. I mean, I think first bridges, then it's could be either or canal walk or access to down below. I think access to down below almost comes next, so that you have a kind of a culmination of a canal walk across Bridge Street and down into what is really a beautiful park that is totally underused right now. I take walks down there, and there's maybe 0 or 1 other person, but it's one of our more beautiful resources. So anyway, that's important.
I would add, oh, sorry, Mark, go ahead. Oh, I was just going to ask if there was anything of a safety concern on any of the properties, because sometimes you can prioritize, redevelopment with anything that's an immediate safety issue. If there isn't, but other than bridges, okay, other than bridges, how about any structures that are just, in a state of such disrepair that they could come down and somebody could get hurt? Sometimes, that could be the momentum for, something also to focus on.
I was going a different direction on the safety issue, but I'll pick up where you left off. I know certainly some of the buildings down by our hydro station are dilapidated enough, and we have a number of folks that use those, let's say, informally. So it would certainly be beneficial, I think, to have those rectified for sure. When you started talking about safety, I was thinking about the canal, and that's one of the reasons I asked whether or not access to the canal physically was something folks were looking for, or aesthetically, because when we operate, the canal can move with some pretty significant velocities and with some pretty dangerous currents involved. And so having access directly to the water of the canal is certainly not something we would encourage, and want to make sure that that's understood in this process.
Other thing I would add too, we just mentioned buildings and safety. I think historic preservation, I'll call it by its name, historic preservation, sometimes controversial, but there's a lot of buildings down there that are a critical resource to the community. It is a difficult situation because they are privately owned by several different owners, but that's something of some urgency, because those buildings, once they're gone, and sometimes it only takes a period of 2 years to move from something that could be a future resource to something that's now a liability that has to be removed and remediated. So the timing is critical on some of those resources.
Words of wisdom, because I think that applies to the entire paper mill. The Robertson paper mill went too long and was unable to be restored. And I think in our historic society properties, there's that risk too. As long as the roofs are okay, they'll they'll last for a while, but getting it involved in the fabric of our community is the best way to make interest, and people will be less reluctant to spend a little money on maintaining them.
There are three of the mill buildings that are critical in terms of on the borderline between still being able to save them and being dangerous and falling down. And that's the TLR, the Wyman Flint, and the lower mill at Moore and Thompson. So flanking the power plant is Wyman Flint and Moore and Thompson. And certainly those would all be great to address, both historically and as uses, and saving the ones that can be while there's time, and identifying a way to address them, the ones that can't be saved, and the property use there, the land use. But just a specific question around the canal. And so it's mostly everything that I hear and different ideas have been aesthetic and to look at. So the question about the canal walls, but just hearing you talk about the velocity and the, I was wondering what about like when you go to Providence, they have some canals. They're not power plants, so they don't have that velocity, but they have things like fire festivals. They have things float on the water. Is that something that's also a dangerous use for that? Is that what the type of thing you were talking about that is a problem? That's a no-go situation.
Sort of the immediate short answer would probably be yes and no go. But the longer term answer, it sort of depends on what exactly we would be talking about, and we would have to pass all of that through engineering and regulatory authorities that have say over those kinds of things for us. So, so there, if it came to having to attach anything to the bottom of the canal, for instance, that we would have to that would probably be cost prohibitive just to engineer. So there's a whole bunch of other concerns that we'd have to be aware of with any of those types of things that we're thinking about. So in terms of getting people to the edge of the canal or to the fence line of the canal to enjoy it, and I think we have a pretty nice aesthetic fence that's there at this point, but getting people to the edge of the canal to see it and enjoy it as part of the rest of the experience that they're there to enjoy, I think is probably the best way to think about the canal in terms of the future use.
I can't imagine anything being in the canal that would be safe. I don't think that's a way to go, in my opinion. And probably Matt agrees with me too.
Yes, I do.
But I guess that's where maybe design comes in. Maybe there's this idea that there's things over the canal, or who knows,
I think
like
the
the Bridge
bridge
of
over
Flowers.
the Bridge of
Sorry,
Flowers.
Tony. Yeah, like
Yeah.
something on that idea where it's more, a seasonal walking kind of thing. Because in the wintertime, it's awfully chilly down there anyway, with the water coming off the canal. But some kind of gardening thing like that might attract people.
The Canal of Flowers.
The Canal of Flowers. Yeah, there we go.
I think a bridge over the canal is about as far as we can imagine involving the canal itself. But I think the first can start right at our new community park down here in the next few years when we can get that rolling.
I just have, what kind of structures can you build over the canal besides the bridge? Could someone build a restaurant over the canal? Could someone? No, I'm just asking. I mean, yeah.
So technically,
Possible.
we own
Possible.
we own the property that is
Challenging. There's a right of way there that you'd have to work out. A pretty historic, hundreds of year right of way.
I'm going to go out on a limb, Tony, and say no.
Yeah, it's actually not a right of way. We actually own the property under the
I
canal.
know,
On the canal
I know,
flow.
I know. No, I agree with you, Matt.
So it's gotten to be 2:30 at least. So we should probably wrap up if that's okay with everybody. I really appreciate the input. We learned a lot, and we're having additional meetings, so we need to think about those. But just sort of next steps, we'll be, really thinking about sort of planning and design ideas for this and coming back with a number of concepts. My thinking on these kind of things is to float of quite a variety of ideas, with the idea that some of them just will get shot down. Some of them might be unique that somebody never thought of. Some of them will be the exact things that you probably expect and make sense. So kind of a range of things that then we come back and we sort of vote or somehow decide a few priorities and narrow it down to maybe a couple good ideas, and then probably eventually to a good idea. So that's kind of how I think about it. And I think that's kind of what we agreed to do in this study. So if we're all set, did you want to say anything else, Gary, or we're good? Yeah. Thanks everybody for your time. Yeah.
At the beginning, but we haven't talked about it in sort of the charrette phase here. But in terms of renewable energy development, if we're thinking about battery storage, for instance, the proximity to.
I'm not sure that microphone's on.
I keep having issues with it. I feel like I'm at a press conference. So if we're thinking about renewable energy, which we were talking about earlier, and we haven't really talked about in the charrette phase of this, is that having battery storage development, for instance, being closely located to the existing energy infrastructure, so the substations that are within the study area, or our own facility, for instance, having that in that vicinity and proximate to those interconnection points is critical to the viability of those projects. And so when you're thinking about sort of the south half of the study area here, that has the best access to those resources for those purposes. So if that is something that we have a vision for, then be thinking about that in our plan.
Do you have a sense of the square footage ground area? Not the amount vertical, could be anything, but in terms of
the energy density that you can get out of battery storage, for instance, and there's lots of different energy storage technologies that are being promoted these days, but battery storage, lithium ion battery storage is getting more and more dense every year. I know we're looking at other potential projects in Massachusetts that have, you can fit a utility scale project on parcels that count you're counting it in square feet, not acres. So the energy, and as I said, the energy density is getting more and more as time goes on. So the capability to do those types of things on small spots, and that's why I was saying earlier in terms of solar as an alternative out here, maybe that's just land intensive. It just is. Whereas battery storage or other types of storage technologies or data centers or that kind of thing don't necessarily need to be very dense. They're typically built in Connex boxes.
Another renewable energy concept that I'll just throw out, just an idea that was run by me by a community member, is solar panel canopies over the public parking areas on the island. I don't know how that would work, but just an idea that someone.
Again, if you're thinking about this as a, if one of the ideas is sort of as a renewable energy epicenter, for lack of a better term, I love that idea. Also, electric vehicle charging stations in your parking areas as well, to be co-located with those. I mean, you've got these excellent municipal parking areas that could be further developed with canopies or with EV charging stations. And now all of a sudden, that's going to, if you have those publicly available, that's going to be a draw for a whole nother aspect of clientele that would come park, plug their vehicle in, and walk downtown. And so if you have this renewable energy focus, you draw that crowd as well. So I think that's an interesting idea for the area.
Thanks, everybody. I think with that, we'll wrap it up and we'll see you again in the future.
Thanks for the invite today. Greatly appreciate it.
Bye.